couple of days, the next couple of hours will be different from anything that you've been to before. Because what we're really about is having conversations. And what we've done is gathered people that we think are extraordinary, provocative, brands that we admire, people that we think are strategic or leading the future. Because as you've heard me say many, many times before, no one can predict the future. All we can do is try to prepare ourselves to learn to expect the unexpected. So you're going to hear lots of interesting conversations today, and we hope that you'll leverage those conversations on social media. Engage in the conversations. Use our Ford Trends hashtag, and I hope you'll also opt into our mobile media platform, which will engage you in ways that we haven't done in the conference previously. So ultimately, when I try to explain to people what a futurist does, I describe myself often as a polite contrarian. My role is to challenge people. So I ask them, what is their worldview? Where do they develop their values, their behaviors, their attitudes? What shaped those things? And what happens if the lens in which they look at the world happens to be wrong? Now, we know that in 2015, right now, the global population is 7 billion people strong. And during our collective lifetime, that number is going to grow. It's going to grow to 9 billion, some people say 10. Other estimates go as high as 11 billion people through the year 2050. And that will come with it a whole host of challenges. Generally speaking, none of us really notice that the population is increasing because we live in markets where fertility is declining. We live in the rich world where education is increasing and it has an inverse relationship in women's fertility rates. In the 1950s, there were 5 births for every woman. Today it hovers around 2 in the United States, happens to be one of many countries that are below replenishment rate. So in other words, all this growth that I'm talking about is going to happen in parts of the world that are not well suited to handle it. We're going to happen in parts of the world where you have widespread poverty. The gap between the have and the have-nots is growing. You have resource issues, problems with infrastructure. You may have an unstable government. One of the things we know is that as the population grows, they're going to live in densely populated areas, megacities. So a megacity is a city that has a population of 10 million people or more. There are about 20 of them in the world today, but in the coming decades, there'll be 30 more added. In fact, it's estimated that in the country of China, they're adding 1 megacity per year. And so today, when we start exploring the future and what that might look like, the first question we ask is, how do we develop cities in a way that's sustainable? So you're here for some really extraordinary experts from inside and outside of Ford Motor Company. And I'd like to bring up our first sustainable cities expert. We have Stone Librande, who is the lead designer for SimCities. Take it away, Stone.
So I've been making video games for about the last 15 years, and most recently the game that I worked on as lead designer was the new SimCity game. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm not a city planner by any means. I'm a video game designer, but we took a lot of research and put it into this game, and I'll go through some of that. So first of all, a refresher for anybody who doesn't remember or know what SimCity is. SimCity came out originally in 1989. It's been through these 5 versions. You'll notice there was a 10-year gap between SimCity 4 and the SimCity that I worked on. Just to refresh your memories about, if you played some of these games, which one you played, you can just take a look at the screenshots. This was the very first SimCity. Did anybody play this? I'm actually curious. Okay, yeah. So you're dating yourselves by how old you are when you play this game. Then, over the years, the graphics got a little bit better. Each iteration added a little more colors, this isometric perspective. SimCity 4 started adding this concept of regions, where you could work with other cities and they could work together to make these larger setups. And 10 years later, though, we have a lot better graphics. So this is the most recent SimCity. It's all in 3D. It has all of the bells and whistles you would expect of a modern PC game. You can move the camera down to the street level. You can look at little people walking around, build up boats, airplanes, roadways. Now, this is some of the work that people do. This is these fun little cities that you'll see posted online sometime, where they'll come up with this new way of what's the most efficient way to route traffic around a city? I think this circle type of thing will work really well. And blue is commercial, green is residential, and the yellow is industrial out on the perimeter. And they'll kind of play and make experiments that way. They love to post their cities up online if you do a YouTube search. You can see people will speed build their cities. They'll spend like maybe 8 hours working on a city, but they'll compress it down to 3 minutes. And then you can watch that city grow up really fast. We also had some different challenges. This is a little event that we ran where some urban planners from MIT were making a city with some urban planners from NYU. And we had them kind of hooked up together remotely. They were both in the same region together. And our hope was like, this will be the best city ever. Like, these are graduate student urban planners working on this. And it turned out all they did was they fought each other by like, one city made a whole bunch of industry and blew the smoke into the other one. And the other city built a bunch of casinos and they had a huge crime rate and they had the criminals cross over and harass the other city. So it didn't quite work the way we thought, but it was still kind of fun, the results of that. More importantly for me anyway, is not the graduate students who are already in urban planning, but the children who play this game. So we've shipped about 4 million copies of the game all around the world, and it really resonates a lot with children who play it, and they'll learn a lot about cities that they never have before. This is from SimCity EDU, which is a work of a company called Glass Labs, which is trying to take video games and use them to educate children, and they've taken a version of SimCity and they've worked it into curriculum to show different students about how cities will work. One story that I heard was some inner city children from Oakland started playing the game, and they had never realized that power comes from somewhere, that there's such a thing as a power plant. They had been so isolated in their own city, and of course there's no power plant in the middle of Oakland, so they weren't even aware that a power plant existed. The light switch was just a magic thing that you turn off and on. So kind of opening up children's eyes to understand what's going on in the world and seeing that bigger picture, so when they grow up they're much more responsible and understanding. All right, so let me talk about the expansion pack that we created. This is where we wanted to add more futuristic things to it. So one of the first questions we started asking was, how far forward should we go for this expansion pack? We want cities of the future. Do we want the Jetsons flying cars? Do we want teleporters? Do we want matter replicators and all the things you see in Star Trek and things like that? We just decided that's just too magical. That's not going to really resonate. And in some ways you can just solve all the world's problems because you just have this magic technology that just does everything for you. And we started looking, well, what about 10 years from now? And it's like 10 years from now, cities are probably not going to look much different. They might have a lot more roads and highways. The buildings might be a little bit bigger. But there's not going to be this fundamental change in 10 years because of the infrastructure has to support all that. So we ended up with a number around like 25 to 30 years that we thought we would target. And our rule of thumb was that if it's in a lab somewhere, then we can put it in the game. We have to find some proof somewhere that somebody's thinking or doing these things for real. That is not just from a science fiction book. So we started looking at different technologies going on for power. Big energy problems, of course, they're talked about all the time, and as cities start to use more and more electricity, somebody's got to be generating that power. Fusion reactors are talked about a lot. They're actually in Lawrence Livermore Lab, not too far from here. They've done some of the first fusion reactions are happening right now, where they can basically make little mini suns inside these magnetic containment fields. So we would expect maybe 30 years from now, we might have some fusion power plants out there. Tidal power from wave generation, if you're in a coastal city, those are already existing today. For the utilities, there's a big problem with landfills. What are we doing with all of our waste? There's some companies right now that are working to atomize garbage. Basically, you take anything you want, you put it under this super high pressure, super high heat, and you can break it down to its component atoms. And in that case, you just have atoms, that's fine to release back out into the environment. The problem with the technology right now is that you get a bunch of atoms, but you also get this sludge of other things that they don't know what to do with right now, but they're working on that. Sewage sanitizers. Around here in California, you're probably aware we're going through a severe drought. Just recently, there was a news article where the mayor of San Jose was drinking some filtered sewage water from the plant down south here. And they were showing that, like, this is directly from the sewage system, we can treat it to be drinking water. The problem usually with that isn't the technology. The technology is actually really good at doing that. It's people's mindset. It's like, I don't want water pumped to me that comes directly from the sewage plant. So trying to convince people that that's actually okay is going to be one of the challenges. Transportation systems, we looked at like magnetic levitation, Elon Musk's Hyperloop that he's been talking about. Different types of fast vehicles that can move around. These already exist in Shanghai and other places. We talked a lot about drones, and we were expecting that, like, in the future, nobody's going to be flying around in a drone, but they'll be delivering packages back and forth. And this is actually before we heard that Amazon was really seriously looking into this. So even though we thought we were maybe 25 years out, maybe we're really only 5 years out as far as drones go. The VTOL's vertical takeoff and landing, this kind of got put into the game because the team really wanted flying cars, because we felt like every future city should have flying cars in it. But we couldn't really find any real examples of that being practical in 25 to 30 years. However, we thought heavy industry might be using vertical takeoff and landing to make shipments and to get into areas, remote areas that might be harder to get to that don't have a normal airport. And finally, manufacturing, we had all sorts of new technologies that already, like fracking, where we can go further into the ground. We can pull out more and more resources. So we wanted to include those in the game as well. New ways of getting the broad resources that we need to run our cities. The problem here, of course, is that the deeper you go, the more you start to corrupt that landscape around you and make it uninhabitable as it starts to kind of spread out and take over deforestation, things like that. So eventually we kind of came up with this idea that there's two, what we call the bookend cities that you could work on. Now in the real game, a player can take all these components and they can mix and match them any way they want. There's no right answer in SimCity. You're free to do whatever you want. It's more of a toolbox, a sandbox really, than a game where there's a goal, other than your own self-directed goals. So one of the bookends is what we call the Academy City, and this is the city that's all about research and advanced technology. And in some ways, it's kind of the utopian vision of the future where everything's clean and green, and everybody's just happy all the time. It's just this great, perfect world. But when we really started looking into it from a video game point of view, as a designer, I can't have that in my game, because if it exists, then people would win the game and they would stop playing it. So everything has to have kind of this push and pull on it. And with this Academy City, this research city, one is that it doesn't really make much money. It just costs huge amounts of money to run and fund all this research. The other thing is it needs huge amount of power. Where's that energy coming from? And also it attracts, or it needs highly educated people, which tend to want a lot of money. And so as you start to build these cities, the people who are working in them start to basically say, where's our schools, where's our parks, where's our other infrastructure that we need? And you start pushing out all of the lower wealth people. They don't have a place to live anymore as you start to get this gentrification starts to happen in your city. We also had this idea of control net, which is that everything is going to be run by a central source. And if that goes out, then all your systems are going to shut down across the whole city when everything's interconnected. So there's kind of this push and pull, and then it gets into maybe a little dystopian where it's like, you build a city up and you realize the rich people are running everything, and they have their finger on the button that can shut everything off. And that kind of makes players come up with their own little stories about what's going on in their city. But eventually you can get these beautiful cities, these what we call mega towers connected together, and you can build these things out and just have these like wonderful science fiction type cities of the future. The other bookend though is what we call the Omega Coast City. And this one was just the opposite in every way. It was, we want to manufacture more. We want to make more commercial goods. We just want to sell things. We want consumers. Everybody needs to consume all the time. And the city, the people are actually really happy as long as they're getting their Omega. Now, we never say what Omega is in the game. That's up to the player. They can write their own fiction about what they believe Omega is. But it needs a lot of resources to create. And if people don't get it, they start getting really unhappy. But as long as you give it to them, they're just fine. They'll do whatever you want. And it actually turns out in this city you don't want to educate, because the less educated they are, the less they'll complain. And the more they get educated, they start to complain. So if you want to be the mayor of this city, you want to get as many resources as possible, and you want to just keep your people kind of happy and sedate. But you can build, again, these wonderful like Blade Runner type cities with the huge mega towers, advertising on every surface that you can imagine, trying to keep the people happy and keep the money flowing. So those are just kind of two bookends. Again, the player's free to do whatever they want in the game and experiment with it.